This is a piece called The Teachings of Don B., a Yankee Way of Knowledge. While doing anthropological fieldwork in Manhattan some years ago, I met on West 11th Street a male Yankee of indeterminate age whose name I was told was Don B. I found him leaning against a building in a profound torpor, perhaps the profoundest torpor I have ever seen. He was a tallish man with an unconvincing beard and was dressed in the fashion of the village in jeans and a blue work shirt. After we had been introduced by a mutual acquaintance, I explained to him that I had been told he knew the secrets of certain hallucinogenic substances peculiar to Yankee culture and in which I was professionally interested. I expressed a wish to learn what he knew and asked if I might talk with him about the subject. He simply stared at me without replying and then said, "No." However, taking note of the dismay which must have been plain on my face, he said that I might return if I wished in 2 years. In the meantime, he would think about my proposal. Then he closed his eyes again, and I left him. I returned in the summer of 1968 and found Don B. still leaning against the same building. His torpor was now something very close to outright gloom, but he greeted me civilly enough. Again I asked him if he would consider taking me under instruction. He stared at me for a long time and then said, "Yes." But, he warned me, states of non-ordinary reality could not be attained by just anybody. And if just anybody did, by accident, blunder into a state of non-ordinary reality, the anybody might bloody well regret it. Yankee culture was a fearsome thing, he told me, and not to be entered into lightly, but only with a prepared heart. Was I willing, he asked, to endure the pain, elation, shock, terror, and boredom of such an experience? Was I, for example, ticklish? I assured him that I was ready and was not ticklish or not overmuch. He then led me into the building against which he had been leaning. He showed me into a small but poorly furnished apartment containing hundreds of books stacked randomly about. In the center of a room, a fire was blazing brightly. Throwing a few more books on the fire, Don B. invited me to be seated, and we had the first in what proved to be a long series of conversations. The following material, reproduced from my field notes, has been edited somewhat to eliminate the dull parts, but in the main reflects accurately what took place during the period when I was Don B.'s apprentice. In dealing with any system of world interpretation different from our own, it is necessary to make use of the technique of suspended judgment. This I have done, and I urge the reader to do so also. June 11th, 1968. We were sitting cross-legged on the floor of Don B.'s apartment, facing each other, with the fire, which was kept going even in summer, between us. I decided to ask Don B. about the fire, for it was markedly hot in the room. "Why is the fire burning, Don B.? It's hot in here." Don B. gazed at me for a time without answering. Then he said, "Fire burns because it is his nature to burn. Fire is a friend, but one must know how to treat him. He contains 1,000 invisible Brillos which, unleashed, can cause considerable harm to life and property. That is why we have fire engines. The fire engines throw water on fire and drown the invisible Brillos. They fear water." "What is a Brillo, Don B.?" "A sort of devil who is invisible." "But why doesn't your fire burn a hole in the floor?" "Because I understand fire and know his secrets," Don B. said. "When I was a boy in the city of Philadelphia, fire seized many houses, shops, and other buildings and burned them to the ground. But he never seized my house because I knew his secrets and he knew I knew his secrets. Therefore he stayed away." "What are his secrets, Don B.?" Don B. laughed uproariously. "You are a fool," he said. "You are not a man of knowledge. Only a man of knowledge can understand secrets. Even if I told you fire's secrets, they would be of no use to you." "Can I become a man of knowledge, Don B.?" Don B. fell silent. He stared at his knees for some moments. Then he gave me an intense look. "Maybe," he said. I went away filled with a powerful and deep sense of warmth. June 13th, 1968. We were sitting as before on the floor of Don B.'s apartment. "What is a man of knowledge, Don B.?" "A man of knowledge," Don B. replied, "is one who knows. He not only knows, he knows that he knows. He has an ally to help him know." "What does the ally do, Don B.?" "The ally helps the man of knowledge know and also helps him know that he knows." "Do you have an ally, Don B.?" "Of course." "Who is your ally, Don B.?" "Turkey," he said, and laughed uproariously. I went away filled with the sensation of not having heard him correctly. June 17th, 1968. I had brought Don B. some food. We sat on the floor eating fettuccine on rye in silence. I had noticed that although Don B as a rule ate very little, whenever there were 2 sandwiches on the floor he ate both halves of his and half of mine, which I thought a little strange. Without warning, he said, "You feel uncomfortable." I admitted that I felt a bit uncomfortable. "I knew that you felt uncomfortable," he said. "That is because you have not found your spot. Move around the room until you have found it." "How do you mean, move around the room?" "I mean like sit in different places." Don B rose and left the apartment. I tried sitting in different places. What he had said made no sense to me. True, I had been slightly uncomfortable in the spot I had been sitting in, but no other place in the room seemed any better to me. I sat experimentally in various areas, but could discover no spot that felt any better than any other spot. I was sweating and felt more uncomfortable than ever. An hour passed, then 2 hours. I was sitting as hard as I could, first in one place, then another, but no particular place seemed desirable or special. I wondered where Don B was. Then I noticed that a particular spot near the south wall was exuding a sort of yellow glow. I painfully sat over toward it, sit by sit, a process which consumed some 12 minutes. Yes, it was true. In the spot occupied by the yellow glow, I felt much more comfortable than I had felt in my original spot. The door opened and Don B entered, smiling. "Where have you been, Don B?" I caught a flick. "I see that you have found your spot." "You were right, Don B. This spot is much better than my old spot." "Of course. You were sitting too close to the fire, idiot." "But, Don B, what is this yellow glow that seems to hover over this particular spot?" "It's the lamp, dummy." I looked up. Don B was right. Immediately above my new spot was a light fixture containing 2 150-watt bulbs. It was turned on. I went away filled with a powerful sensation having to do with electricity. June 18th, 1968. Once again I had asked Don B about the famous hallucinogenic substances used by the Yankees. Without replying, he carefully placed another book on the fire. It was Elias Ashmole's Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum. "When I sneeze, the earth shakes," Don B said after a time. I greeted this announcement with a certain amount of skepticism. "Show me, Don B," I said. "The man of knowledge does not sneeze on command," he said. "He sneezes only when it is appropriate and right to do so. That is, when his Brillo is inside his nose, tickling him." "When is it appropriate and right to sneeze, Don B?" "It is appropriate and right to sneeze when your Brillo is inside your nose, tickling it." "Does each man have his own personal Brillo, Don B?" "The man of knowledge both has a Brillo and is a Brillo. That is why he is able to sneeze so powerfully that when he sneezes the earth shakes. Brillo is nose, arms, legs, liver, the whole shebang." "But you said a Brillo was a devil, Don B." "Some people like devils." "How does the man of knowledge find his personal Brillo, Don B?" "Through the use of certain hallucinogenic substances peculiar to Yankee culture," Don B said. "Can I try them?" Don B gazed at me for a long time, an intense gaze. Then he said, "Maybe." I departed with a strong sense of epistemological obfuscation. June 20th, 1968. "The 4 natural enemies of the man of knowledge," Don B said to me, "are fear, sleep, sex, and the Internal Revenue Service." I listened attentively. "Before one can become a man of knowledge, one must conquer all of these." "Have you conquered the 4 natural enemies of the man of knowledge, Don B?" "All but the last," he said. "Them some bitches never give up." "How does one conquer fear, Don B?" "One takes a frog and sews it to one's shoe," he said. "The right or the left?" Don B gave me a pitying look. "Well, you'd look mighty funny going down the street with only 1 frog sewed to your shoes, wouldn't you?" he said. 1 frog on each shoe." "How does having frogs sewed to your shoes help one conquer fear, Don B?" But Don B had fallen asleep. I was torn inside. My most deeply held values, such as being kind to frogs, had been placed in question. I really did want to become a man of knowledge, but at such a cost. June 21st, 1968. Today Don B looked at me for a long time. His gaze, usually so piercing, was suffused with a sort of wet irony. "Xavier," he said, "there is something about you I like. I think it's your credulity. Belief is very important if one wishes to become a man of knowledge, to truly see. I think you might possibly be able to see some day, but seeing is very difficult. Only after the most arduous preparation of the heart will you be able to see. Even though you are not a Yankee, it may be that you will be able to prepare your heart adequately. I don't know. I'm not guaranteeing anything. How does one prepare the heart, Don B? One cleanses it with either a yellow warmth or a pink luminosity. I don't know which is right in your case. It varies with the individual. Each man must choose. So we will try both. but I must warn you that the experience is dangerous and sticky. Your life may hang on how you behave in the next hour. You must do everything exactly as I tell you. This isn't kid stuff, buddy." I was filled with a sense of awe and dread. Could I, a Western man, enter into the darkest mysteries of the Yankees without putting myself and my most deeply held convictions in peril? A profound sadness overtook me, followed by an indescribable anguish. I suppressed them. "All right, Don B," I said, "if you really think I'm ready." Don B then rose and went to a cupboard. He opened it and removed 2 vessels which he placed upon the floor near the fire. He opened a second cupboard and produced 2 ordinary drinking glasses, which he also placed on the floor. Then he went into another room, returning with a sort of crock with a lid on it, a small round yellow object, and a knife. All of these he placed on the floor near the fire. He knelt alongside them and began a strange, rather eerie chat. I could not make out all of the words, but they included town, pony, and feather. I wondered if I was supposed to chant too, but dared not interrupt him to ask. I began chanting tentatively, town, pony, feather. Abruptly Don B stopped chanting and began whittling at the small yellow object. Was it this, I wondered, that generated the yellow warmth he had spoken of? Soon there was a small pile of yellow-white chips before him. He then reached for one of the vessels he had taken from the cupboard and poured a colorless liquid, perhaps 4 ounces of it, into each of the drinking glasses. Then he crossed his eyes and sat with his eyes crossed for some moments. I crossed my eyes also. We sat thus for 4 minutes, our gazes missing each other, but meeting, I felt, somewhere in the neutral space on either side of us. The sensation was strange, eerie. Don B uncrossed his eyes, blinked, smiled at me. He reached for the second vessel and poured a second colorless liquid into each glass, but much less of it, about 1/2 ounce per glass, I estimated. He then removed the top of the crock and took from it 6 small colorless objects, each perhaps 1.5 inches square, placing 3 of them in each glass. Next he picked up one of the yellow-white chips and rubbed it around the rim of each glass. Then he stirred the mixtures with his index finger and handed me a glass. "Drink it down without stopping," he said, "for if you pause in the drinking of it, the Brillo which it summons, your personal Brillo, will not appear, and the whole thing will be a bloody goddamn fiasco." I did as Don B bade me, and drained the glass in one gulp. Immediately, a horrible trembling convulsed my limbs, while an overwhelming nausea retracted my brain. I flopped around on the floor a lot. I became aware of, left to right, a profound sadness, a yellow warmth, an indescribable anguish, and a pink luminosity. Don B was watching me with a scornful smile on his face. I was sweating, my stomach was cramping, and I needed a cigarette. I saw on my left the profound sadness merging with the yellow warmth, and on my right the indescribable anguish intermingling with the pink luminosity. And suddenly, standing with one foot on the profound sadness, yellow warmth, and the other on the indescribable anguish, pink luminosity, a gigantic figure, half human, half animal, and 100 feet tall, roughly. A truly monstrous thing. Never in the wildest fantasies of fiction had I encountered anything like it. I looked at it in complete, utter bewilderment. It was strange and eerie, and yet familiar. Then I realized with a shock of horror, terror, and eeriness that it was a colossal publisher, and it was moving toward me, wanted something from me. I fainted. When I revived, it took me to lunch at Lutece, and we settled on an advance in the low 50s, which I accepted even though I knew I was not yet in the truest sense a man of knowledge. And if I got stuck, I could always go back and see good old Don B.